This video is going to demonstrate how to analyze the introduction of a journal article. This journal article is called Self-Affirmation Activates Brain Systems Associated with Self-Related Processing and Reward and is reinforced by future orientation. You can find the link to this article in the description below. The purpose of an introduction in a journal article is to set the stage for how we got to this place of having this hypothesis, this research question that we want to test in the first place, what other research has been done in the past, and how does that research establish the question that we have created, and also how does it frame the way that we are going to do our actual research project once we understand what other people have done in the past. So it's well documented. Anytime I see stuff like well documented, I'm already questioning, what do you mean by well documented? How well documented is this actually? Are you just saying this is well documented to coerce me into thinking it's well documented when it's really not well documented? So I'm going to look at the article that is actually linked talking about the well documentation. For all journal articles, they're going to have whatever reference they were using in order to come to that statement that they're making. And so you can always check those references. So I just right clicked and went to the reference itself. Now I'm just pulling up the reference and I see, okay, this is just the summary of the passage of this reference, but it's saying that it's this chapter and it's an overview of self-affirmation theory. Okay, so this is literally a chapter in a textbook. It's not another article. So there's probably going to be a lot of stuff. If you I can also find other ways to be able to access this actual article. And I can see here, this is 60 pages long. That's including references. So the actual article is probably about 45 to 50 pages. Yeah, about 48. So I can say, okay, there's probably a lot of documentation within here. I don't need to continue looking through this to help me affirm that. It probably is well documented. Okay, continuing on. Large body of literature. Again, large body. This author is really liking to talk about like overstating things potentially. Well documented, large body. You could also just say there's some literature, it is documented. You don't have to say well documented. So it's leading me to think this author's tone overall is going to be very in agreement or like affirming, advocating for whatever they're pointing out here. A class of interventions, self-affirmations benefit across certain situations, decrease stress, increase well-being, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is literally just a list of things they can do. I don't really need to take notes on any of that stuff, just continuing on. And again, there's another review. These are the same authors. This Cohen and Sherman is the same Cohen and Sherman that was mentioned here. So now I'm kind of wondering if Cohen and Sherman are just this author's mentors. And so you're just going with what your mentor has already been doing. Two, if you have a bias, so you only think Sherman and Cohen are the people who can talk about it, or maybe Sherman and Cohen are really the people who've like established this research field. And so you can't really avoid having some research that is based on what Sherman and Cohen did. I don't know. I don't really care enough to figure that out, but that is a question that's concerning me. This author needs to like have other people validating the things that they're saying for me to be more convinced of the things that they're saying. They affirm one's self-worth. Okay, so you're literally just defining what self-worth is. In turn, allow individuals beyond self-that. Okay, so now I see Steele mentioned here. So we've got somebody who's not Sherman and Cohen, who's now mentioned, but is also mentioned with Sherman and Cohen. So it sounds like there's other people who are affirming whatever Sherman and Cohen were saying, that I have more confidence in whatever these authors' points are. Effects associated occur without explicit awareness. Okay, explicit awareness means that like explicit versus implicit. Implicit means like you don't automatically know it, or it's like inferred or implied, whereas explicit is like directly stated. So explicit awareness is like they for sure are aware of it. They don't assume they're aware of it. I see the same Sherman and I look at this, it says Sherman et al. Et al means there's other authors. If I look at this list of other authors, who's the second author? Cohen, once again. So Sherman and Cohen are back to this list as being just very often the reference here. They introspect, makes it difficult to examine underlying mechanisms, behavioral change, neuroimaging methods, blah, 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 blah. 1 point of affirmation exposure, need to reflect on experience. So now I see Falk et al. So this is somebody else who's a researcher being referred to as well, aside from Sherman and Cohen. So again, just like Steele, adding to the validity of these statements being made. Neural mechanisms have not been studied. Again, Sherman and Cohen. So this is presenting that there are some things, neuroimaging methods can do something, but however, now it's going to present something that wasn't previously stated that is going to provide a challenge that's probably something the author themselves are trying to address. The neural mechanisms have not been studied. So I can anticipate that that's what the authors are trying to do, is actually study those neural mechanisms. And then, yeah, it says understanding the mechanisms will help further expand the understanding, blah, 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 blah. Thus, so now they're presenting the actual things that they're going to be doing. Our first research question, so it sounds like there's going to be at least two, more than one research question if they're saying first. Otherwise, they would just say our research question. They wouldn't put in the first situation there. Our first research question centered on neurocognitive processes associated with active self-affirmation. Okay. Furthermore, core brain systems involved, we hypothesize overlap with blah, 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 blah. Okay. This furthermore doesn't sound like it's continuing with this sentence previously. So the first question is the processes associated with the act of affirmation. And that comes from this whole thus situation, which is this statement was setting up was giving background for them to say thus and present the first research question. So I can anticipate the same thing is going on in the next sentences. So now, furthermore, brain systems will hypothesize overlap with past studies of temporal orientation, i.e. considering events in the past and future. Okay, so temporal orientation, past and future. Thus, so again, thus, see that again. Second research question focuses on whether neural pathways, affirmation amplified conjunction with specific temporal orientations. Those temporal orientations being considering events that were past or future. So then now it looks like it's proposing even further descriptions of each of those research questions. So the pathways to affirmation, we said, was going to be the first research question. And so accounts, blah, 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 blah. Now it's just giving more background on why there are going to be potential ones. Blah, 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 turn to thought, well-being. Okay, now I see Sherman, Cohen, Sherman, but I do see Cook mentioned here and I see Kuhl mentioned here. So there are other people besides Sherman and Cohen, but again, Sherman and Cohen are once again mentioned, and the dates for these articles are different than other dates. So they may be different papers. It may also be the same paper that was just republished or published differently in a different time. I don't know. I don't need to read all of the other background articles. I'm just taking notes about all of the other articles that are referenced in this background information or in the introduction that may influence how the research was done itself. Such effects might arise through several different pathways. First, it makes increased blah, self-affirmation. This pathway would engage with blah, blah, brain regions. Okay. So now it's saying there's two brain regions, the ventral striatum and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, and the MFPC and DS are the two areas that other research meta-analysis have demonstrated. So that sets you up to think, okay, they're probably going to do some research on the VS or the VMPFC in whatever study they're doing now. Related to the pathway, also could focus on sources of self-worth, personal successes, involve specific reflection. Sherman and Hartson, okay, we've got somebody who's not Cohen, Hartson, but then we've got this Sherman situation. So more of the same. Bartra is also somebody who's not Sherman and Cohen. Specific reflection on personal attributes outside of the threat. Okay. Meta-analyses to find self-related processing most often associated. Okay, so now we have the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex. So now we've got at least 4 different areas of the brain that they're going to be looking at, and they have the research to talk about why or where those areas of the brain as research studies came from. So if self-affirmation succeed, blah, 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 activity in this should increase during affirmation. So they're hypothesizing that if this, then this. So we can do this and see if this occurs. If it doesn't occur, we can talk about why it didn't occur. But our hypothesis is if this occurs, then this is going to occur. Furthermore, again, with this furthermore situation, so now something else is probably going to be brought up. Demonstrated in blah, 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 blah. Fishing uses psychological needs, resources to deal with threat. Okay. So now I've got the affirmation interventions reduce the threat. Okay. But they don't know what actually is used. So now they've got the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, and the anterior cingulate cortex as other regions. So they're going to be checking out the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, ventral striatum, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the anterior cingulate cortex, all different regions of the brain, to see what types of changes in functions are occurring there. And then they talk about all of the researchers that led to those regions of the brain being established as functional in those aspects. Self-affirmations work, blah, blah. Okay, activity, reward regions of interest, changes, temporal focus. Oh, okay, so this is the temporal, so past or future orientations things. Past experience, future goals. So now I've got somebody else who's researching. Cool, not Sherman Cohen, but again, adding to the research body of literature they have. It has not been a core focus. So now they're going to make it a core focus. We examined whether neural responses associated might change with or be reinforced by temporal focus. So, okay, they're seeing if associating it with the past with future will change how successful a self-affirmation is. Imagining future personally relevant, emotionally positive. Okay, so those are three of the regions: the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, the ventral striatum, medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex are all of the regions that were referred to previously. And from now on, they're only going to use these acronyms. So I have to remember like what those acronyms really came from. And if I don't remember exactly, I always can scroll back up to figure out what those acronyms are. But I recognize they're not about to say ventral medial prefrontal cortex again. It's always going to be VMPFPC, PFC. Reaching median meta-analyses in increased activity in the empathy, blah, 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 among other regions associated with thinking about hypothetical future compared with past episodes. Okay, so it's saying more future stuff than past stuff based on this recent meta-analysis, and it's in these specific regions. So another analysis, another meta-analysis associated with personal goals, future thinking, mind wandering, MFPC. So now it's like, okay, MFPC is mentioned here, MFPC is mentioned here. Cool. So we're going to be looking for sure at the MFPC. I'm anticipating MPFC. Studies support the idea of mentally staying future events, blah, 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 including VMFPC, PCC, MPFC, PFC. Okay, so now I can say those are the three regions. They've already established that. So now thus, again, this the situation. They like this the situation. But it helps me know the next statement is really the conclusion of all of the previous stuff that they said. Both future-oriented thought, self-affirmation, similar neural mechanisms mutually reinforce one another. Okay, their differences are not limited to neurons. Okay, so memory recall, encoding neural information, past events, time relationship, mental simulations, future events, benefit goal planning, psychological well-being. Okay, so it's not just neural activity. It's confusing because then it's talking about memory recall and remembering past events and mental stimulations, which to me is still neural activity, but whatever. They're saying it's not just, I'm assuming those other regions. I don't really know. I don't really care. It's saying other things that kind of confuse me. I didn't write this paper. Taken together, all of these studies reinforce hypothesis engagement of our key ROIs. I don't remember what an ROI. Region of interest. Do you remember? Temporal focus, future orientation, reinforce effects. Cool. Examine temporal focus as potential mediator. Thus is really the only sentence that I really need to read of this background to like give me everything. Everything else is just like foundational information to get me to the thus sentence. In sum, I love an in sum. The study elucidate understanding, blah, 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 fMRI. They did this stuff, blah, blah, blah. In addition, examined, da, 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 da. So this is just in summary, and then they describe how they validated it. So this overall is describing what actually they did in their research study. All of the rest of this is setting up the stage for this paragraph to be presented to you, to me, to be able to know how we got here in the first place.